Hi, everyone. I'll be presenting some of the latest and some older research that McKinsey has been running on the future of work and on future skills. The context in which we have launched this research is one where many employers have often complained about new hires not having the right skills, but oftentimes they're not complaining about the technical skills. It's really something that they call in general soft skills. And linked to this, then we have seen that automation and digitization has started to change the nature of work. COVID has also exacerbated the need to learn digital skills. And so these need for soft skills has only increased in recent time. And so for this particular reason, the latest research has gone much deeper into what these soft skills are. So I'll start with one of the first research that McKinsey Global Institute ran about 5 years ago. This research looked at all the occupations in the market. For each occupation, it looks at all the tasks and activities, and it looked at whether every specific activity could be automated with existing technology and how long it would take, depending on the country, to automate that activity. Now, the high-level story was that there's a very large number of occupations that will change significantly. Not many will completely disappear, but change is going to be widespread across most of these occupations. The second piece of research that we ran is trying to tie a specific set of skills to each of those tasks that the McKinsey Global Institute has analyzed, and see with the increasing automation and digitization, where is the balance going to go? How much time people will have to spend in the future using different type of skills. And these are the results that we found, right? Both in the United States and in Western Europe, but this is somewhat similar in all the countries we have run this research, including some more emerging and developing countries. The balance of skills is moving, the balance of time that people will spend using skills is moving more towards the skills that are in the higher cognitive, social emotional skills and technological skills. So this was a bit the starting point for our latest research, because at this high level, higher cognitive, social emotional skill, it's still very difficult to think of how do I create a program? How do I create assessments? It's still too high level. And so this is the focus of the latest research, which has gone much deeper in defining and assessing what are these future skills? What are these skills that citizens will need to future-proof themselves for tomorrow? And we have looked at across 15 countries. We have had 18,000 respondents to this. And so now I'll share the results of this research. Let me start though a bit with how we constructed this and why we did this research, right? First of all, we saw that there was always a discussion whether we're talking about skills, attitudes, attributes, competencies. And so we wanted to cut a bit across all of these more academic and nomenclature discussions and say there's clearly some elements of talent. It's a combination. Sometimes it's closer to attitudes, sometimes to mindsets, but there are some elements that clearly form the building blocks for people in any occupation and in any sector to continuously be ready to learn and ready to be to meeting the needs of the future of work. And so what we did then is we had a long list when we started to unpack the higher cognitive, the social emotional and the technological skills. We had a very long list looking at the literature of all the potential skills, attitudes, attributes, and so on. And so what we did is we tried to filter them through a three-step process. One is we filter any element of talent that was linked to people being able to stay relevant to machine as automation grows the amount of activities and the type of activities that can be automated. The second filter was around any skill that helps people operate successfully in environments that are increasingly digital. And the third lens was around any skill or attitude or mindset that help increase the adaptability. Given the future of work, we have seen the key thing is that there's going to be a lot of change in any occupation. And so there needs to be continuous learning. And so out of this filtering and selection process, we got to basically this is the closest we could get with a periodic table of elements of talent, similar a bit to the periodic table of chemistry elements. And we try to bring a bit more structure and clarity to a problem that otherwise, if it stays at the soft skills or at the future skill, it's too vague. And so the purpose here was really, let's get very concrete and practical on what these future skills are. And now with this idea of elements of talent, which are, as I mentioned, a combination of skills and attitudes. So you may recognize the categories here, right? So on the top left corner, you have the cognitive skills, which we split them in critical thinking, which itself includes a variety of skills, structured problem solving, understanding biases, logical reasoning, seeking relevant information. Then you have communication, we have planning a way of working, and we include mental flexibility also in this broader cognitive category. Then you have on the top right corner, the interpersonal, bottom left corner is the self-leadership, and the combination of these is basically the unpacking of the social emotional skills. And again, we try to create groups and to go quite deep in what are exactly the skills and attitudes that are behind entrepreneurship, self-awareness, goal achievements, teamwork, effectiveness, developing relationship and mobilizing systems. And then ultimately, there was a long discussion on whether we also should have digital skills. The technological skill frame was very broad. Many technological skills are very specific of an industry or a function, but still we saw that there are some basic digital skills are really needed for everyone in whatever the occupations, whatever the function they work on. So we decided to include the basic ones here with a group around digital fluency and citizenship, which is really the more basic skills. A group around trying to understand how digital system works. And you see data literacy, understanding how smart system work, some literacy of cybersecurity, tech translation and enablement, which is around the ability to speak the language of, or understand at least the language of both the tech side and the business side. And then there's a category around software use and development, which is not about being software developer, but is having the basic literacy to understand how code works, what it can and what it can't do, how to analyze and work with data, and how to, and a bit the computational and algorithmic thinking. So that was, to some extent, not the end point, but the starting point, because once we were able to identify and define these skills and attitudes in such a granular way, we were able, for example, to build a research tool to assess what's the level of proficiency of a general citizen along each of these elements. And so this is what we did. So to read this page, 100 is not the score of the empathy of a nurse and the digital skill of a software developer. We calibrated 100 to be the level which is useful for any person to have whatever the job they're going to do. So what you see here is that there is, on average, a gap along all of these spectrum of elements, right? All of these categories and skill groups have some gaps. The digital gap was bigger. Now, the field research was done before COVID. This might be different today because we've seen a lot of digital upskilling happen and was forced to happen during COVID. And then the other bigger gaps we found was on communication and the ability to plan and work in an agile way. But the message we found is across country, the gap, there's an average, a big gap to fill to get to 100, which is the desirable level, not the excellence, not the advanced level. Then what we try to do is to see, can we find already today some correlation between those people that have a higher proficiency in these deltas with some of the outcomes, be that employment, the chances of being in a higher income group in each of the countries that we looked at, and the chances of being more satisfied with one's job. And so we saw that at least for some of these deltas, we found significant correlation, higher for some, lower for others. But this is the way to read this page is one single element of the 56 that I've showed. The difference between, there's 3 levels of proficiency. So the difference between having proficiency 1 and 2 or 2 or 3, only on one of these, everything else held constant, any other demographic held constant, gives a 20% higher chances of being either in the employed or a higher income bracket or in satisfied with the job. So that's for a single element. So that's to some extent quite significant. And so this was to say these skills, these elements of talent are important. There is already data today. It's not just for the future, right? This is the case today. And in some conversations we had after we published the paper, many said, look, what you have here is to some extent not new, right? Many have been saying that these are the skills that are needed the most. So many call them durable skills rather than future skills, because those stand the test of time. Those stand the test of, across industry, across function, but also across times. In this page, I show another reflection after we have published the paper. Many said if it's 56, it can't be really that these are the foundational, right? There must be a hierarchy. And so this was our attempt to understand, is there indeed a hierarchy in these elements of talent? And we saw indeed that, there are some technical deltas, the ones that are more linked to digital. Those we kind of think them as at the bottom of the hierarchy, because they are needed today, but their shelf life is quite short, right? And it's not that these allow to learn other and to develop other deltas. So those are important, but more at the bottom of the hierarchy. Then in the middle, we saw that there are some of these elements of talent deltas that are more linked to humans, being able to really intrinsically human, and therefore machine won't be really automating them anytime soon. And so those we saw, all the critical thinking, some of the interpersonal skills, those fit in there. And those clearly have a longer shelf life, but we still thought that that wasn't the top of the hierarchy, right? Like at the top of the hierarchy, we found that there are some of these elements of talent that only once you have them, and if you have them, you then are able to continuously, develop your human deltas and learn new technical deltas, right? And so we thought that there was really something more important, which is around, especially when you think of earlier education and what the education system, or what what's the when you can still shape, or you're still in a situation to change the person, what can you focus on, right? And so that's where mental flexibility, so around the adaptability, ability to learn, coping with uncertainty, but also the self-leadership, being aware, taking feedback, working on feedback, having the confidence to speak up, the grit and resilience to pursue goals. So those felt always a bit more at the higher level of the hierarchy. And so if you want, the ones that are really foundational are that narrower set. And if I go back to the previous page, what you can see on the top elements that are most correlated to impact, to outcomes, you have adaptability, which is the first for employment. You have coping with uncertainty. There is both the second for employment and the second for job satisfaction. Self-confidence is in the top 3 as well for income and job satisfaction. So we saw that those growth delta, also the data is suggesting they are the one with the highest correlation with outcomes. So there is something around the hierarchy as well. As I move into closure, this is maybe the more surprising finding, because when we try to correlate the proficiency we found in these deltas with whether someone had finished university or only a vocational certificate or only high school, overall we found high correlation with the overall score, right? So there was clearly the ones that have gone through university had an average score overall that was higher than the ones stopping earlier. But then we found that wasn't the case for all the elements, right? I think what you see on the right here are the elements where we found that the highest correlation between whether someone had gone and finished universities and their proficiency in these elements. And so you'll find the digital ones here. You'll find mostly the cognitive ones. And this is also what the education system will tell you, right? We focus a lot on the academics, and so naturally it's more the cognitive that we develop. We don't necessarily focus on the rest. And so what's interesting on the right is also when you see inspiring trust and humility, those are 2 elements where there is higher correlation with education, but the coefficient is negative. So the more it was easy to predict whether someone had high or low proficiency in inspiring trust, but you would say that the ones that have finished university have a lower proficiency in inspiring trust and humility than the one that finished earlier. On the left, you have all the elements where we found very weak correlation, if at all, with so it was really difficult to forecast whether someone had high or low proficiency based on whether they finished university or not. And so all the skills, all the elements on the left, you see that there's very little correlation with education. And the problem for employers is that you know, these elements weren't developed on average, at least, through the education system. And so this is a shortfall that the employer needs to start addressing. Some of them, they address it by trying to hire only people that have those skills. But you know, it's not always difficult to assess them before you actually get to know the person. And so it's something that employers are starting to have into work while after people have been hired. And maybe I'm closing with this picture, which is a bit a different research that we did after COVID, where we look how the nature and the focus of what organizations were training their people on has shifted between pre-COVID and post-COVID. So somehow the COVID challenge, besides the digital, which is obvious, it shifted a lot of attention on these more elements of talent or transversal skills, which are more linked to the self-leadership and the interpersonal skills. So we asked, we had an option of a list of 25 skills. This was a different taxonomy. It was done from a different part of McKinsey. And what they found, though, is that the ones where they had seen the biggest shift between the focus, the share of people giving training and taking learnings on those skills before COVID and after, the biggest shift was in all you see at the top, like leadership, critical thinking, decision making, project management, adaptability. Basically, so these are what you have seen, you know, very close to what I presented here, right? So to some extent, this COVID somehow has made this shift, has shifted the attention towards these skills. And I think both in the education, but also in the adult training world, and therefore in the world of corporate, the key question now is how to best develop these, because the challenge is that it's not easy to assess them. They're oftentimes not teachable. It's really encouraging people and in developing them. So it's what's the best way to guide people in this personal growth and development journey, as opposed to giving yet another training. And I think this is the challenge, the biggest challenge that most of the L&D colleagues will have in the next few years. Thanks, everyone. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.